My name's Cassie O'Connor, and I'm from Glue Mobile. And I have the privilege of introducing Davina and Natalia from Sony Interactive Entertainment. Their talk on QA vendor interdependence will show how they manage the high volume and high demand workflow for QA. They manage numerous studios with numerous services all over the world. In fact, when they started telling me what they did, it was very daunting. So, to show you how it's done, please welcome these two incredible ladies to the stage. And also notice, they have their Prosecco ready. So let's give them a big round of applause.
Hi. As Cassie said, my name is Davina Mackey. I work for Sony Interactive Entertainment as the Director of Business Services for Worldwide Studios QA.
And I'm Natalia Craddock, a Principal Vendor Analyst on the Vendor Management team. And my business unit, or our business unit, reports into Davina's organization. Ultimately, we are responsible for global outsourcing strategy in worldwide studios.
So together, Natalia and I, we aim to illustrate how QA manages global outsourcing demand for worldwide studios.
Through the years, we have developed an interdependent relationship with our partners, utilizing variety to navigate from AAA challenges to indie hiccups.
Yes, and so today we're going to delve into where vendor management sits within the SIE organization, and then we're going to look at internal considerations before outsourcing requests are triggered. I think it would be interesting, Natalia, to give them some insight into our outsourcing pipeline. And then we'll give some insight into our multi-vendor strategy and our service strategy. And then we'll wrap things up and give some real-life examples on how outsourcing works within some of our titles, such as God of War and PlayLink.
Sounds good. And if we do have any time left, we'll open it up for a short Q&A session.
So Worldwide Studios QA sits within the Worldwide Studios division of SIE, and vendor management sits within the business services pillar of QA. Now, vendor management, the same as QA, is a global team, and we have employees located in the US, the UK, and Japan.
And as a truly global team, we are positioned nicely to support 33 first and second-party studios located all over the world.
And looking at the volume and variety of the work that we have, QA, we support 37 titles for Worldwide Studios. And today we're going to go over a few of those. So you'll hear us talk about localization testing, compatibility testing, community testing, which we also call early access testing, and then functionality testing.
And we work on average of 1,700 titles, or as we call them, SKUs, per fiscal year. And of course, it includes all relevant patches and DLCs. So let's have a look when and why QA actually outsources, or what are internal triggers or considerations that need to take place before we look into using an external partner. So when the title comes to QA, we usually look into two things first, or primarily it's capacity and capability. Exactly. So I'll go over capability first. So we ask ourselves when the title comes into QA, do we specialize in this type of testing? Do we have the relevant hardware? Do we have enough of this hardware, or do we need to procure more? Will it be on time? Will it be cost-effective? Does it actually make sense to procure it? Do we have the right people with the right expertise, or do we need to train them on it? If the answer on those questions is no, then, well, obviously, we'll go with outsourcing. But if the answer on those questions is yes, we'll look into capacity, right, Davina?
Exactly. And so in dealing with capacity, just like any other company, we have limited capacity within our facilities. And so we need to ensure that we are very efficient, as efficient as possible. And one way we do that is looking at a staff flexing model. Our staff flexing model includes the following: internal resources, which are our full-time regular staff. And then when we reach capacity with our full-time staff, we then look to a managed service partner. That's a variable resource that we utilize. When our facility is at capacity, then we reach out to other regions and we tap into their internal resources in addition to their managed services resources. And then we also, after we have reached capacity in all regions, our studios may ask us, can we utilize your resources? Can you embed them into our studio? And then we have a new service resource type that we utilize called captive service. Now this will allow us to have dedicated Sony resources that only work on Sony titles, and they can be nearshore or offshore. Also, they might be in the same time zone. And then last, we also deal with on-demand. Now, theoretically, we use our internal resources first, but on-demand resources can be triggered at any time. And it's not necessarily due to capacity, right, Natalia?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at our typical outsourcing workflow or request pipeline. In vendor management, we try to follow a NITIL life cycle. And through the first two stages, which is service strategy and service design, we usually get our requests. Davina, will you talk about it a bit more?
Yeah, so generally there are 3 request points. The first being our fiscal year budget cycle. And that's where we're looking at the upcoming title slates. And then the second point would be our second half reforecast, which is halfway through the fiscal year. We're looking for any changes in scope that may have occurred after the first of the fiscal year. And those changes could consist of development. There might be date changes to the schedule. There might also be, let's see, I gotta look at my notes. Additional languages that the studios are asking for, or they're asking for additional services.
Absolutely. Well, at any point of time, if there's any request coming outside of those 2 points you just mentioned,
Yes.
well, it's considered an out-of-budget request.
Mm-hmm. And so when these budget cycles happen, we're looking at the scope of all the testing, and we're gathering that information. And then we utilize this information to do capacity, capability exercises, and that exercise will help us determine what type of outsourcing needs we'll have.
Well, obviously, and we also need to take into consideration if our partners can actually fulfill the request. Do they have the capacity and capabilities themselves, or do we have to go through the request for proposal or request for information exercise? Maybe we even need to do some pilots to determine whether the service could be fulfilled or not.
Yeah, and then we really do our best to follow the ITIL life cycle and continuous service improvement process. And we look to emphasize this on contract management, business relationship management, performance management, and procurement. So looking at our multi-vendor strategy, QA, we choose to exercise a multi-vendor strategy. We essentially are saying we don't want to put all of our eggs into one basket. And there are multiple reasons for this, but the key factor is best in class. And we look at best in class as vendors who are most fit for purpose to execute the services requested by the studio. And so, this applies to people. It also applies to our vendors and the services that they offer.
Indeed, but a one-stop shop might be a fantastic solution overall, but not every service included in this solution will be best of breed or
Right.
best of class. So we usually look into our vendors' individual services, and we also look into our titles' separate needs. And only then we decide what's the best suitable partner who could support us on it.
Yeah, so a multi-vendor strategy is definitely have its advantages and disadvantages. And most people might say, well, that's the most expensive way to do it versus going with the single vendor strategy. But at SIE, we truly believe that this will allow us to have competitive pricing. It also allows us to mitigate risk against, let's say, a studio going out of business, or a vendor going out of business, excuse me, or a vendor who scales back on services, and then we are all aware of the vendor who's acquired by another organization.
Well, we all know who we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Well, at SIE or at QA, we value our personal and professional relationship we spend years building with our external partners. That is why we opt to use a smaller number of preferred vendors. It's like an open relationship. We know about their partners, they know about ours, but at the end it works out well for all parties involved.
Yeah, so this methodology, it really allows us to enhance our negotiation power. It gives vendors great sense of investment and buy-in in our products, the risk and the successes. And it gives us an opportunity to save on onboarding new vendors. So for training, for VPN infrastructure, and it helps us to attain access to more technology and innovation. Lastly, it improves the quality and the support we receive from our partners. Essentially, it keeps them on their toes.
That's true. Well, it's like a partnership.
Exactly.
We invest in our partners, they will invest in us. And ultimately, we're all here to create the best gaming experience possible for all of our fans to enjoy.
Yeah. So now we're going to go into our service strategy. And localization is our oldest and most mature service. We've been doing localization outsourcing since 2002, and we consider ourselves to be subject matter experts in this area.
I actually started as a localization tester, so of course I believe that localization is absolutely critical to a release of every title, because I guess of PlayStation's desire to reach wider markets.
Yeah.
And our games and systems actually support a plethora of languages. Well, you name it, it could be Indonesian, Thai, Croatian, Czech, and so on. And it's just to fulfill our mission and vision. And as Davina mentioned, as our most mature service, we have the biggest amount of onboarded vendors. They all located in all 3 regions to support us. And we have the highest volume of outsource hours per fiscal year.
Yeah. And so in the recent years, we've added new services to our vendor management portfolio, most notably community testing, functionality testing, which also comprises of compatibility testing. And then we're looking to scale even further and add compliance testing to our portfolio.
I think out of all the services you just mentioned, I think community testing is probably the hardest to manage internally because of, I guess, its ad hoc nature and because it's only a small number of titles ever requiring it. So this service, community testing, is almost all outsourced.
Right. And so with loc testing and functionality testing being our core service, with functionality testing, it was quite different because we had to deal with the cultural differences.
Yeah.
The studios or not really understanding functional testing as an outsourced service. And so we were looking to make sure that we could utilize a service that would support this. And so captive service strategy is what we decided.
Indeed. Well, I guess functionality, in terms of functionality, we might utilize a multi-vendor strategy in the future when functionality QA will reach the same level of maturity as log QA. And So far, I think it's only rests with one external partner.
Yeah.
In regards to community testing or compatibility testing, as you mentioned before, those services are not readily available in-house because we don't really have space. And to be honest, PlayStation is a console gaming company first.
Yeah.
But more and more titles actually utilize companion apps or they use mobile as a controller. So we just have to make sure we meet their needs.
Yeah. All right. So we've gone over how vendor management and where it sits within the SIE org structure. We've talked about our outline, our pipeline. We also talked about internal considerations and how outsourcing requests are triggered. We gave you some insight into our multi-vendor strategy and our service strategy. And I think now it's time to go into, those real-life examples on how outsourcing really works.
Sounds good. Well, let's have a look what we did to ensure the success of this flagship title. Super excited. And I actually played it. I loved it. God of War. Well, obviously, as you know, this is a big title. It comes with its own challenges. Well, let's start with, say, it has 17 languages. We utilize our flex staffing model, which you could see on the screen. So it's comprises of internal resources, managed service partner. We had some internal resources in other regions. We had some embedded resources in the studio, but we're gonna focus on on-demand outsourcing because that's where vendor management sits. And on-demand outsourcing in this case was triggered to capabilities. As I mentioned before, it had 17 languages, and it was languages like traditional Chinese, Thai, Czech, Croatian. So we didn't have them in-house.
Yeah, so we needed an experienced partner who would not only support us with obtaining these unique languages, but we were looking for a partner who could share in the associated successes and risks that are inherent in AAA titles. And we were looking for someone with a fresh approach, who had passion for our games, and who had eagerness to overcome some of the challenges that we had, most notably the unpredictable schedule. And we all know how unpredictable schedules can be in our industry.
Well, yeah, that's why we had to have a partner with overtime flexibility and the ability to work shifts when needed. And this partner also had to be experienced on our processes.
Yes.
And actually working on AAA titles, because this is not the title to have teasing problems on.
Yeah. And so with things all being considered, we decided on one of our existing core partners. They were located in Europe and with ease of access to languages because, again, we did not have the ability or the capabilities for the languages in the US, the UK, and in Japan. And so they also helped us with local legislation where we were able to have a flexible overtime staff. Now we're going to go into another one of our titles where we had a bit of a challenge here because we were dealing with a problem that we've never faced before, but we were able to find a vendor that would be able to support us to solve this problem. And so, again, historically, we have a lot of experience with outsourcing low QA, but this was a new service that was requested. It was community testing. And so community testing was something that we had looked at in the past, but we had never really established a service for it. And we had to really think on our feet. January 2017, I remember like yesterday,
I know.
where we had to really find quickly a vendor that could support us in this area.
Yeah, absolutely, especially for these 4 launch titles we
Yes.
had to do. So when it came to community testing, we had to learn that actually, again, there are 2 things we had to take into consideration. So it was capacity and capability. But in this sense, by capacities, we mean the biggest amount of mobile devices to replicate the real-world environment. And by capabilities, or by capacity, we actually mean the biggest audience possible. So after a few internal discussions and very long, heated calls, we decided to go with our trusted partner who could provide us with a large network of beta testers, and those testers could actually provide us with actionable bugs, which required little or pretty much no redlining at all.
Yeah, and so the testing sessions included up to 1,000 active users at one time. And, this was split between two regions, Europe and North America. And it was a challenge for our vendor because we were giving them requests in very short time spans, and they really met the need that we had. And so you have to remember that beta testing is not your traditional 9-to-5 job. We were expecting to have resources work over the weekend, and this was something that they were able to accommodate, and the people actually needed to order secure numbers for requesting these services as well.
Absolutely. Well, we had to work with our partner to adapt the service to meet our needs, and they actually displayed an amazing agility to solve all of the problems we had during those tests, and after all, we got the results we wanted, and everyone was happy.
Yeah. So, in our final example, we're going to talk about a top secret upcoming PlayStation title.
Oh, guys, you're going to be so excited about it.
But you can't say anything. Promise? All right.
I'm super excited.
So, AAA title PS4. You didn't really think that I was going to give you a secret, right?
No, I can't talk about it.
All right, so for our final example, we're going to focus on on-demand outsourcing, and then we're going to talk about captive services. And so for this title, it required 19 languages, and many of which, again, was not available within our regions, US, UK, and Japan.
And we also learned that we actually had to onboard a captive service partner. As you guys remember, it's off-site, dedicated resources in a partner's facility who work exclusively for us. So we had to onboard this partner because of the capacity restraints, but this time it was on the functionality side of things.
Right, so again, traditionally, we did not, I should say, outsource functionality testing. This was really foreign to our team. And so we really had to take heed and make sure that we chose the right strategy to support this.
And actually, to change the culture and to deal with those capacity restraints, we had to have a partner who could provide us with the regional support for our QA studio to provide seamless support to our first-party studio. And functionality is very dynamic. It's one of the most dynamic services.
Right.
It changes from one day to another, from 1 hour to another. So we had to have a partner who could be very agile, who could pass on our SIE culture to the scaled-up teams at the moments of time.
Yeah. And I would like to stipulate here that we hold our vendors dear. We totally believe that they are capable of doing the work. But that doesn't mean that we take advantage of that. And so in this case, we went through an extensive request for proposal. And we also, if the vendor or the vendors passed that, we also had a pilot exercise that they had to go through. And it helped to make sure that we were picking the right vendor for the captive service strategy. In all, we ended up picking an existing core vendor. And the reason for that is because this vendor understood SIE. Well, let's step back. In addition to passing the RFP and the pilot, winning the pilot, They understood SIE processes. They also understood the nature of the culture. They knew this was very new and that we needed to be very successful going out the gate. And we knew that they had the capabilities to take and execute this strategy.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I guess to wrap things up, let's have a look what we looked at today. So we looked at where vendor management sits at SIE.
Yep.
We looked at our outsourcing strategy, at our multi-vendor strategy, what it takes, what kind of triggers or considerations we have internally, which is capacity and capability, before we go into outsourcing. We looked at some real-life examples, how we utilize this strategy. So yeah, that's been great.
Yeah, I really appreciate the time that you guys have given us. It was our first time speaking, and I'm going to drink my Prosecco now.
I know. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much, guys.